Well, we got some interesting readings come for us this week. We're going to be looking at a real powerful one today and tomorrow. And, of course, obviously, we have powerful ones every day. But during the week, these the ones that we're looking for. And by the way, I say today and tomorrow because I haven't looked at the rest of the week yet. And I'm looking at today's and tomorrow's. They're going, oh, yeah, these are great readings. And I have actually found another Bible. As you know, I use the Dewey Rams, but you know what? I discovered, now, they're always, Father, why don't you use the Bible that we read in Mass? Isn't that the obvious one you should use? Yes, you're right, we should use that one, but it's copyrighted. We're not allowed to. And if I use that without asking permission, this literally happens. I risk getting a phone call from the Office of the Copyrights of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops telling me to cease and desist. Do they do that? Yes, they really do. Strange as it may sound. I remember many years ago when I started writing, my father was a writer. He wrote for the Boston Globe. As a matter of fact, Saturday was his 41st anniversary of his death. But anyway, he wrote for the Boston Globe. And I talked to him. I said, do you have to get any kind of permissions when you're taking something from the Bible? And he said back then, no, the Bible's written, the Gospels are written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and I don't think they're going to sue you. Well, that's different now. The United States Conference of Catholic Bishops own the Bible that you listen to at Mass, and you need their permission in order to get to read the readings that are at Mass from that version, which is the New American Bible Revised Edition. So I happened to find another version of the Bible that I can use, and here it is. It's called the Catholic Public Domain Version. I think I have that right. Let me make sure I have that right. The Catholic Public Domain Version of the Bible. And this allows me, because public domain means that you can use it. And it's a new translation of the Latin Vulgate using the Dewey Rams as a guide. Now, understand that that's kind of what I do anyway, except I read the Dewey Rams. And then, so what I do is I read the Dewey Rams and I just update the language. But this is an actual version that does that. And he takes the Dewey Rams, which, by the way, now, why is the Dewey Rams so important? Because it is a direct English translation. By the way, English and Old English translation from what is known as the Vulgate. And that was the versions actually done by St. Jerome and St. Clement. So those are the versions, and this is an updated version. But as I've been saying all along, this is in the public domain, which is now, it's just easier for me to work with. So you can find it at sacredbible.org. We want to thank especially a man by the name of Ronald L. Conti Jr., sacredbible.org, who is the one who, I guess, from what I understand, what I'm reading here, put this together. So, and anyway, that's what we're going to use from here on in. Thank you to the Catholic Public Domain Version, a new translation of the Latin Vulgate using the Dewey Rams as a guide, and that's what it is. Now, there might be some things that we might look at and say, well, that's the way the Vulgate did it, and the other versions do translated a word differently. We can talk about that, but we don't violate copyrights when we do that. I know it sounds strange. Like I said, my father would be going, what? And he wrote for the real Boston Globe, the one that was owned by the Taylors, not that thing that they published today, but the real one. And I worked for the Boston Globe then. He worked for the real Boston Globe since 1941, except for the time during World War II when he came back. And unfortunately, he died with his boots on, as the saying goes, working right up until the day he died. He died at the age of 60. He was very young. But in a sense, but they actually told us because he had circulation issues, he had diabetes, he had high blood pressure, that they expected him from the time he was 45 to go at any moment. So he actually lasted longer than was expected. So anyway, that was my father, the famous Robert B. Carr. That's why I always call myself Robert J. Carr, because that's the difference between us. And I had to be careful about using Robert J. for a long time because of Robert J. Lertzimer, who was a wonderful man on radio. He too has passed away, but of course everyone knew the wonderful Robert J., who worked for WGBH and used to do Morning Pro Musica every morning for years. And he used to begin the program with the 5 minutes of bird sounds. Oh, it was great, Robert J. In any case, Robert J. Lertzimer. In any case, why don't we get on to the show and on to the Bible reading? We're going to be looking at this powerful reading that comes to us from Kings. And this is the story of Naaman the Syrian. Now, Jesus talks about him much later, obviously, during his time. As a matter of fact, it's during a reading where he reads the scripture and he's in his hometown and he's saying to the people, basically, I know what you're going to say to me, prophet, do your miracles around here, but your prophet, this is a paraphrase, but a prophet is without honor in his own home territory. And he basically continues from there and basically saying that, they aren't humble enough. They aren't able to understand what he's doing. And they get so mad, they try to throw him off a cliff. But that was one of the two readings that he cited. The other one is the widow of Zarephath from Elijah. But here is Naaman the Syrian, or Naaman, the Syrian, king of Aram. And he was obviously a pagan. He was in Syria. And he suffered from leprosy. And, of course, that was a death sentence. It's a death sentence now, but it was a death sentence back then. Now it's called Hansen's disease, by the way. And what happened was he didn't know what to do. And there was a slave girl, it was a servant girl, I think she was a slave girl from Israel, who said, and, of course, then this is before the division, who said, hey, why doesn't Naaman go to Israel, because there's a prophet there who can heal him? So he decides to do it, but no one told the king. And he is king. And so it's protocol to go see the king, and he goes to see the king, and the king says, this is a spy. What's going on here? And he does what is commonly mentioned in the Bible. He tears his robes. What is this? This is a trick. And he's afraid that we're looking at, a Trojan horse type situation. And finally, someone says, no, she's right. There is, by the way, in case you didn't notice, there really is a prophet here. His name is Elisha. Just send him to Elisha. So he sends him to Elisha. This is what I love, because it's so human. He sends him to Elisha, the prophet, who was the understudy to Elijah, and sends him to Elisha, the prophet. And he says, I love this. Sorry, I just love this story. He says, go wash yourself in the Jordan River. And he gets all angry. He says, we have rivers in Syria. Why should I go wash myself in the Jordan River? Our rivers are no better than their rivers. And his men said, basically, you've come all this way. Why don't you just do it? We've come this whole way. You're going to go home because you're all upset. And he does. He dips himself 7 times in the Jordan River, and he is healed. And he praises God. He goes back to Syria and praises God. So this is the powerful story of Naaman the Syrian, who Jesus brings up much better. And that's one of my favorite parts of the story, that whole thing. What? We have water in Syria too. What? Their water is better than our water? It's water. Why can't you understand that? But it worked. It really, it reminded me of a true story happened from my own life when we went to a place, which I guess it's all condos now, but back then it was bungalows, they called them. Bungalow Village. And it was these rental homes. And my mother said, in the whole trip up there, my father's driving, she says, this is back in the time when my mother could walk in 1969. It happened to be literally the same week. We were on vacation at the Bungalow Village the same week that both the Manson murders happened and Woodstock happened, same week. They all happened the same week in 1969. So in any case, we went this whole distance, and it's halfway up the state of New Hampshire. And do keep in mind, New Hampshire may be the bordering state, but it is a big state. And not only that, remember, New Hampshire is the only thing between Massachusetts and Canada. You understand, unless you go where the Vermont side is. But you do realize that. So New Hampshire goes from the northern border of Massachusetts to the southern border of Canada. So it was way up there, and it was a long drive, and we went all the way up there. My mother said, if this place looks like hell, we're not staying. That's it. We're not staying. And we get up there, and this is literally bare bones. As a matter of fact, granted it's summer, the heating system was a wood-burning stove. And, it was, there was no insulation. There was no walls. There were walls, but no inside walls. So there was no, like, what do you call it? The stuff you make walls, I forget, sheetrock. There was no sheetrock. There was no decorations on the wall. It was literally, you'd look at the wall and you'd see the studs, and then you'd see the wood that was the outside. And so you'd see the inside of the wood that was the outside of the house. And it was a gas stove. And my mother took one look and said, "No, we're not staying." And my father said, "We've come this whole long ride. Why don't we at least stay the night?" Well, we had one of the best vacations we ever had in our lives. Best vacations we ever had in our lives. And it was a wonderful time. And for us, obviously I told you in the country it was a little difficult. Well, there was one powerful thing, Woodstock, but one horrible thing, which was the Manson murders that same week. And by the way, I have since learned that us baby boomers are fascinated by Woodstock and no one else gets it. I think I was even talking to Lino Rulli over on Sirius XM. I think I called up the show. And I said, "I heard you people don't like Woodstock." He says, "No, it's not that we don't like it. We don't understand it." But it was that same week. So I always think of that scene when I think of Naaman the Syrian making this journey all the way. And all his men said the same thing that my father said to my mother. "Look, we've come this whole long distance. Why don't, all he's asking you to do is dip 7 times in the Jordan River. For crying out loud, just do it. We came 7 p.m. all this time across the desert, everything else with all the whole thing." Of course, he was a king, so he probably had an old entourage. It was a horrible journey. All he's asking, and you're going to go all the way home because we have the same kind of water in our place. And so he does it just like my mother goes, "All right, well, why don't we stay?" It was a great vacation. And it really was. It was a wonderful day. Now I guess they're condos, and obviously they've been done well. They've been updated, or what do you call them, upgraded. But in any case, this is the story, and that same human reaction. Come on, just stay. And he doesn't. And he's healed. And of course, again, this is from Elisha. Elisha was the understudy to Elijah. There's a scene where Elisha asks if he can have a portion of the prophetic power that Elijah has. And Elijah says, if you see me taken up to the clouds, I don't have the exact verse in front of me, that yes, you can. And he does. He picks up Elijah's mantle, which essentially the sign of him having the same power as Elijah, and he becomes Elisha the prophet, and he's the one that brings the message of Syria. Now, Naaman the Syrian. Now, here is the interesting thing. Remember, it is not Elijah, but Elisha. Elijah is with Jesus in the Transfiguration, but it's Elisha who heals Naaman, and it's Naaman who Jesus cites in the Bible as being the Syrian when he's speaking to the people from Israel from his own hometown and saying, look, and Jesus couldn't do any miracles in his own hometown. It wasn't that he didn't have power there. It's people were just kind of, well, who the heck is he? We've known him since he was in diapers, and all of a sudden he's Mr. Big Time Prophet. I mean, that was the attitude they have. That's not what's written in the Bible, but it was the attitude. So they were like, who the, for crying out loud, he's a pain in the neck when he was 2 years old. You're not going to tell me he's going to heal me, and I'm not going to talk to him. That was the way his hometown was, and he could do no miracles in his hometown. It wasn't that he didn't have the power. It's people didn't believe in him, and so they wouldn't go to him. Him? Are you kidding me? Gee, what the heck? So it's fascinating. So I love the story of Naaman the Syrian. I just love this when it comes around every year, and we're going to look at it. We're going to be right back on the other side of the break. You're listening to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. Subscribe, like, comment, everything else. And you'll find us on your favorite podcast platform. We're going to hear about that in a minute. In the meantime, we'll be right back right after this. Did you know that the Catholic Audio Media Podcast is available on various podcast platforms? You can find us, among others, on Podbean, which is our home platform. You can find it on Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeart, among others. Just look for Catholic Audio Media, all one word. On some platforms, such as Spotify, look for Catholic Audio Media, 3 words, and subscribe and listen to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Patreon. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Check us out. Check what we have to offer. Previews of upcoming podcasts. Previews of upcoming columns over at catholicaudiomedia.substack.com. Your ability to comment, make suggestions, even make suggestions in upcoming programs. Check us out. Patreon.com, Catholic Audio Media. We're back. Well, I found a really interesting story that illustrates, well, it's a sad story, just so you know. It really illustrates well what I'm always saying about really expand your news sources. And I found this in the Folha de Sao Paulo, which is the daily newspaper in Sao Paulo, Brazil. By the way, if you want to know where Sao Paulo is, the northern border of Sao Paulo is the Tropic of Capricorn. So that's where it is. So Sao Paulo borders the Tropic of Capricorn, and that's the northern border, so it's south of that. So technically, Sao Paulo is not in the tropics, even though its northern border is literally the Tropic of Capricorn. Rio de Janeiro, which is 3 hours north, is in the tropics. So if you were to relate Sao Paulo to Florida, it would be basically somewhere, I think the Tropic of Cancer. I hope I know it. Tropic of Cancer, yeah. I think the Tropic of Cancer is just south of Florida. So roughly, Sao Paulo would have the same kind of temperature as Florida, roughly. So in any case, this comes from the Folha de Sao Paulo, but this happened in Georgia, United States. So what it explains is there was a Brazilian man by the name of Gustavo Guimarães. He's 34. And he died the previous Tuesday, from when this is written. He died from the police. I originally thought it might be ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, but no. It was the local police in a parking lot, in a supermarket parking lot in Powder Springs in the state of Georgia in the United States, it says, according to a version from the police. Now, the way it goes, and this is a classic example. I'm looking at the story. I can tell you exactly what happened. I mean, granted, it's not the official story. I'm just going by what I see here, and it's obvious what happened. Do you know they have this big argument over whether or not the police should have social workers working with them, and that maybe instead of hiring more police, they should hire social workers? And you hear people, that's ridiculous, that's stupid. And no one is more against that than James Woods, the actor. But I will tell you, and I know the police will tell you the same thing, No, they're right about the social workers. And I'll explain to you the reason why. You don't bring the social worker instead of the police. But there are certain cases that a social worker or someone like that should at least be there. And we had a similar case that I dealt with. The reason is simple. It's not anything bad about the police, but the police do what police do. That's their job. They're like, if you have a nail, then how do you put the nail in the board? Then you have to get a hammer. That's what a hammer does. Well, I don't need to do that. I need to cut a piece of cake. Well, then you don't use a hammer for that. You have to get a knife. You understand? Well, what about I have butter? Well, then you get a butter knife, but don't use a hammer or a cake knife. Use a butter knife. So you see what I'm saying? You have to have the right tool for the right job, as we learned when I was in wood shop. Well, this is the issue with the police. The police are going to do what the police are going to do. That's what they're trained to do. And it's not that they are bad. They are sometimes the wrong tool. And this is apparently what happened. Apparently, I don't think he was officially diagnosed. He was in the process of it, but apparently he had some form of schizophrenia. As a matter of fact, they said the family said that he represented signs of schizophrenia. And the strange thing is there was someone who was there to help him, and that person, during this interaction with the police, had a heart attack. So what happens is they had to take the guy who had the heart attack, who was like the friend of him, of this Gustavo, and took him to the hospital. And when he gets into the hospital, he found out that that Gustavo was shot by the police. And what they're saying is, well, no, he was very kind. He was against violence. Something's up about this. I can tell you, looking at the whole case, I can tell you exactly what happened. They said he wasn't a violent person, but he also could have a lot of fear of the police. So probably he had a lot of fear of the police. The police are going to act the way the police are going to act. That's what they're trained to do. That's what they do. And somewhere in the midst of that, according to the police, when he got to the station, he pulled out a gun. And people said he didn't have a gun. So now you're going, which side is which? It's being investigated by the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. But and so anyway, apparently he had a gun and they shot him. And killed him. And there was an interesting comment I saw from Brazil. Well, not necessarily from Brazil. It was in the Brazil. It says, I wouldn't necessarily agree with this, but this is what it said. In the United States, this is in Portuguese, and I am translating it. In the United States, the police have the license to treat the citizens as marginal people. Abuse of authority here is licensed to kill. This country is a dictatorship with elections. I wouldn't necessarily agree with that, but you know why I read that? Because that's how some people see the country. This is why it's important to look at things from other countries. Now, I can tell you a story. I've discussed it before here, and that was the case. We had a woman who we believe was schizophrenic, and she could get very upset, and she would hang out in our church. And she would just hang out in the church, and she would color and just sit there. And during the day, she would just come, sit in the church, color, and do other stuff. And then she'd leave. Well, she had been, before that, she was in the library. Someone called the police, and the police have to do what the police have to do. And they came. She got all upset. I think she slapped someone, or maybe she slapped someone. They called the police. She's schizophrenic. She obviously is going to read the situation differently, and it's going to turn into a mess. These were Boston police, so the Boston police are different than Georgia police. That's all I'm going to say. I mean, you can say police are police, but the attitude in Boston, the attitude in Georgia is different. And she wasn't shot or anything, but it was obviously something that was disturbing to the way her way of thinking. So when she started hanging out with us, I made sure the right people knew. So I called the city. We worked with the Department of Mental Health, and the police department knew. And the whole attitude of all these government agencies was wonderful. If she's hanging out there and you don't have a problem with that, if you have a problem, just call us, but now you're helping us to help others. And it was a classic example. And they told us, they said, if you have to call the police, make sure they call a community service officer. But we were in contact with the Department of Mental Health. We were in contact with the police, and we were in contact with the city. And they knew the situation, so they would keep an eye on it. In a sense, the Department of Mental Health would show up every so often just to see how you're doing, the whole bit. And we were all working together. But it was a classic example of that sometimes the police aren't the right tool for the job. And that's not saying anything against the police. I will tell you this, there's a different style in Georgia than there is in Boston. There's a different style in California than there is in Boston. California is shoot first, ask questions later. I've seen it. Well, I haven't seen the shooting part. I have seen them put a chokehold on someone and knock someone out. That's the way California is, and they enforce every single law. It's shoot first, ask questions later. We had a party in Mission Viejo, and this is back in the 80s though, but party, and there was a helicopter flying around the neighborhood watching every place where the party was, and as soon as the party ended, they told me there would be a cop at the end of the street keeping an eye on every person who left the party. I mean, California was a police state in the 80s. It's probably the same at least now. Boston's never been like that. Georgia, I don't know. But I know Georgia can be more, shoot first, ask questions later, but it can be more strict in certain ways. And it's just a different style. In every case, yes, there are certain cases you need something like a social worker or something else, which we found because the police are a tool, but you want the right tool for the right job. And in most cases, they are the right tool for the right job. But in some cases, they are not. And I bet you that's what happened here. They weren't the right tool for the right job. But once they're called, they're called. There's nothing else they can do or anyone else can do. We're going to be back tomorrow. In the meantime, have yourself a blessed day. The Catholic teaching in this podcast is reflected and presented as accurately as possible. The opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Archdiocese of Boston or any other institution.